crazy declassified FBI secrets you didn't know about. The Bigfoot Files. Nope, you heard me right. There is a declassified document directly from the FBI regarding Bigfoot. And of course it confirms the existence of Bigfoot, right? Not exactly. Oh, and keep in mind, this video only gets crazier as the video goes on. So if the first thing we're discussing is a declassified FBI document on Bigfoot, well, just wait and see what we end up talking about later in the video. But with that being said, the FBI didn't confirm the existence of Bigfoot, but they did have a very interesting situation surrounding a supposed Bigfoot fur sample. In the year 1976, a man named Peter Byron, the director of the Bigfoot Information Center and Exhibition in Oregon at the time, wrote a letter directly to the FBI asking if they'd be willing to test a sample of some alleged Bigfoot hair that they had. Peter isn't just some random guy. Not only was he the director of the Bigfoot Information Center, but he's also a zoologist. Well, a cryptozoologist, which if you don't know what that means, it's basically just somebody who researches cryptids, and there's no actual backing behind the term. Regardless, those are his qualifications. And apparently that was enough to get the FBI not only to respond, but to take his request seriously. The assistant director of the FBI's Scientific and Technical Services Division responded to Peter directly, and even told Peter that in the past, the FBI had actually examined other examples of physical evidence related to Bigfoot. So this wasn't necessarily uncommon for the FBI. The FBI had the results from the test, and they informed Peter that the hair sample that he had and claimed was from Bigfoot was actually, in all likelihood, from a deer. At that point, the case was filed and hidden away for decades. That was until 2019 when the FBI declassified this document and released all 22 pages inside of it, which includes all of the correspondence between the FBI and Peter, all of the lab results, and all of the internal memos associated with this entire claim. To me, the craziest part about this entire situation is the fact that the FBI took this request for DNA sampling on a alleged Bigfoot hair seriously, and the fact that they did this during the time that Ted Bundy was literally on the loose. Like, the FBI was looking for Ted Bundy, and they were like, well, I mean, Ted Bundy's on the loose, but we also might have Bigfoot hair, so the timing on that is crazy. And obviously it's a big organization, but it's just a funny thought. But if nothing else, in 2019, when the FBI finally declassified the Bigfoot files, well, a lot of people were probably really excited until they actually read what the file contained. The Silvermaster Spy Ring. The Silvermaster Spy Ring, or internally known at the FBI as the Silvermaster File, was a declassified document of the FBI that contained 162 volumes and over 26,000 total pages, which ultimately revealed that during the Cold War, there was a massive ring of spies in the US government that were, first of all, high-ranking, and second of all, secretly collecting and sending sensitive information directly to the Soviet Union. If you watched one of our last conspiracy theory videos, then you would have heard me talk about Operation Snow White, which in short was the operation conducted by Scientology to infiltrate the US government, which they were extremely successful at doing. But the Silvermaster file takes place just before the Cold War and during most of the Cold War. This case goes back as early as 1945, when a defector of the Soviet Union came to the United States and worked in the United States government. But she wasn't the spy. She was actually the one who ratted on the spy. This woman's name was Elizabeth Bentley, and she used to work for the Soviet Union as a courier, and so she was aware of information coming into and leaving the Soviet Union. And during her time working as a courier for the Soviet Union, she realized that there was a lot of information coming from the States, specifically from a man named Nathan Gregory Silvermaster. And when Elizabeth Bentley defected from the Soviet Union and actually came to the United States, she was ready to spill the beans. But unfortunately, that was something that Nathan Gregory Silvermaster had been doing for a long time. Nathan was an economist for the United States War Production Board during World War II, meaning that he played an extremely important and sensitive role within the US government, especially in regards to foreign affairs. However, even though Nathan played such a strategic role within the United States government, he wasn't on the United States' side. Silvermaster really has an odd background too, because he was born in 1898 in Odessa, Russia, but then moved to China of all places. And what did he do in China? Obviously, he learned English. And he learned how to speak English perfectly with a British accent in China. He emigrated from China to the United States of America, where he went to university, got a PhD, and became an American citizen in 1926. Interestingly, during this time, Nathan was an outspoken communist. Even in university, the thesis he wrote was titled Lenin's Economic Thought Prior to the October Revolution, which alone isn't damning, but I mean, it's definitely a red flag. But I wasn't able to read this actual thesis, so I can't necessarily give my thoughts on what he mentioned because you could be on either side of this. But he was also, on top of both of these things, reported to be in contact with a very large number of Communist Party USA officials, and was even an active member of numerous communist front groups in the the United States. However, with all of this being known, the US decided that this person would be great to hire on just before and during the Cold War, and it totally backfired. Like I mentioned, Silvermaster was a spy and was sending sensitive documents directly to the Soviet Union. He himself was specifically focusing on sending reports on US arms production, which was basically sensitive information reports on bombers, planes, tanks, guns, radar and submarines, and things like that. Basically anything sensitive to do with American weaponry that Nathan could get his hands on, he was taking a picture of and sending to the Soviet Union. But as I mentioned, this was a spy ring. He didn't work alone, and he was coordinating with a dozen other Soviet operatives. And these people worked in the Army, in the Department of Agriculture, and in the Office of Strategic Services, which was the agency that came before the CIA. All 12 of these people were consistently sending sensitive documents to the Soviet Union, which on top of Nathan's leaks also included war strategy, nuclear weapons developments, and other forms of diplomatic communications. Basically anything that they could leak that would be of benefit to the Soviet Union, they were sending. And they could do so because they had so much access, as these were all high-ranking spies. Because of the tip that the FBI got from Elizabeth Bentley about Silvermaster being a potential spy, the government over the next 3 years paid extra attention to Silvermaster specifically and others in the FBI at the time. And after those 3 years and 26,000 pages later, the government had their 12 guys. But surprisingly, even though there was a huge data breach within the US government, almost nobody who was a part of the spy ring was actually ever prosecuted. Mainly because if the FBI wanted to prosecute these people, they would have had to expose a lot of secrets about data collection, and to them, it wasn't worth it, and it was more of a national security risk to prosecute them than to just kick them out of the US government. Operation Shocker. Operation Shocker was a secret FBI counterintelligence operation that took place from 1959 all the way through 1982. And its sole goal was to deceive the Soviet Union's military intelligence agency, specifically by feeding them fake information. I knew I obviously had to put Operation Shocker after the Silvermaster Files because it just makes so much sense. Operation Shocker centers around one man, Joseph Edward Cassidy. He was a US Army first sergeant, and his job was to pretend to defect from the United States of America to help aid the Soviets. And after getting full approval from the US Army, he was officially able to work as a double agent. He of course had to start by building trust with the Soviet Union, which is exactly what he did, and he gave the Soviets real information that was very low risk, but it was enough to build trust. And once the relationship between Cassidy and the Soviet Union was established, that's when the shenanigans really began to start, as Cassidy would slowly feed the Soviet Union fake documents. But not just a few. Over the course of this operation, Cassidy fed the Soviets over 4,000 documents. One of the main focuses of a lot of these documents were about a fictional nerve agent that the United States government was developing. The point of this information on this fake nerve agent was to A, make the Russians paranoid, and B, make them spend time and money developing and researching a nerve agent that didn't exist. And while Operation Shocker very likely caused the Soviet Union to waste time, energy, and resources on developing an antidote and protection measures from this fictional nerve agent, and possibly causing them fear of what the United States may do with this nerve agent, this operation was definitely not fully beneficial for the United States. Firstly, because 2 FBI agents actually died in a plane crash while conducting surveillance for Operation Shocker, and because this operation was so secret, the families of the agents that died were told lies about the entire thing until this was later declassified. But besides the FBI agents that were killed, it's suspected that because the US government was feeding fake information about a nerve agent to the Soviet Union, this caused the Soviets to begin researching their own nerve agent. And because of that, the Soviets did develop a very real nerve agent, which was known as Novichok. Up until this time, the Operation Shocker documents were declassified. Nobody besides a few high-ranking agents in the FBI were even aware of the true full scope of Operation Shocker. But today, everybody knows the truth. And I'm really hoping that the families of the lost FBI agents know the truth as well. Because imagine if they didn't know and you're just laying on your bed watching a YouTube video and you know the truth and they still don't. Operation Shocker was truly a shocker. Operation Washtub. Operation Washtub, once again, was a Cold War era program launched by the United States government. And while this is going to be the last thing involving Russia I'm going to put on this list, it's too good not to mention, and this is actually probably the coolest out of the 3. During the 1950s, the US Air Force and the FBI were both very concerned that if the Soviets were going to attack America, they were going to do so through Alaska. And because of this, the FBI took action by training Alaskan civilians in covert operations. The FBI selectively chose local fishermen, civilian bush pilots, trappers, and basically any rootin' tootin' tough guy in Alaska they could find that were A, familiar with the landscape, and B, could survive off-grid in Alaska. Once they had collected these civilian men, they started to secretly train them, specifically on how to hide and transmit information, how to move undetected, and how to resist interrogation. Their goal wasn't necessarily to fight as soldiers or to be, ninjas. Their goal was to simply act as civilians, and if there was a Soviet occupation that took place within Alaska, they could be working as secret agents behind enemy lines, and the Soviets would be none the wiser. I can only imagine how cool it would be to be like a hunter in Alaska, and then you get approached by the FBI and they're like, hey, do you want us to train you how to be a spy for the US government? Obviously, the Soviets never had an occupation in Alaska, but that doesn't mean that the United States wasn't prepared for it. All of these men that were trained by the FBI had to keep all of this a secret from their family. And this entire operation was a secret until the early 2010s, when the Operation Washtub document was declassified, and the world got to know exactly how sneaky the Americans can be. And honestly, I think this is a pretty genius operation. Project TMB. Did you know that the FBI once planned on assassinating popular YouTuber Trust Me Bro? Wait, what is this? Wait, sorry, I'm just reading this document live right now. The FBI said that the only way that they would not eliminate Trusty Bro is if Trusty Bro hit 1 million subscribers in the year 2025, and that his subscribers considered checking him out on Twitter and Instagram, just in case anything happened to his YouTube channel. Guys, this is a crazy declassified document, and it's probably best we take it seriously. For the sake of me and the channel, if you like our content, consider subscribing. And I've never mentioned our other socials before, but I have a Twitter that's pretty inactive, but it's there, and I have an Instagram that we post pretty regularly on. So if you're a fan of the channel, check it out. Because as of right now, the FBI is not on our side. And trust me, your subscription and follow might just save my flat 2D butt. The FBI tracking Aretha Franklin. Honestly, the title of this one kind of says it all. The FBI was tracking the Queen of Soul, Aretha Franklin, not for a little bit, but for over 40 years, according to declassified documents. Aretha Franklin was a famous singer of soul music and had no known criminal record, but that didn't stop the FBI from having a 270-page document about Franklin, on top of tracking her movements, all of her affiliations, and even scrubbing the lyrics from all of her songs just to get any information they could find. Why were they doing this? Well, because Aretha Franklin was an African-American singer, and she was involved with civil rights activism, something that the FBI was closely monitoring. One of the biggest reasons why the FBI was tracking Aretha Franklin was because she was very close to Martin Luther King Jr. She would perform at rallies, speak during protests, and was seen as an influential civil rights leader outside of just being a famous musician, which is why the FBI wanted to keep an eye on her. Basically, just because she was famous, black, and was outspoken about civil rights. And the FBI claimed that their main concern was that these sort of lyrics and speeches and movements could cause political unrest, which is interesting to say the least. And if you watched our last video about conspiracy theories, then you would know that Aretha Franklin was not the only person that was monitored by the FBI. There was an entire FBI operation known as COINTELPRO, which was dedicated to monitoring, gathering information, and even publicly discrediting and shaming people associated with either civil rights movements or communist movements. And this included a lot of famous people, including Martin Luther King Jr., John Lennon, Elvis Presley, Jimi Hendrix, Frank Sinatra, and many, many more. The files that the FBI kept on Aretha Franklin never showed that she did anything wrong. And the only thing that it really proved was that the FBI was willing to waste money to make sure that famous, rich, influential black people weren't saying anything that they didn't like. Operation AJAX. Operation AJAX was an operation led by the CIA, not the FBI. But it's worth talking about, so I'm going to mention it here, and was also in collaboration with the British intelligence agency MI6, a group you've probably heard of. Operation AJAX revolves around Iran, oil, and overthrown governments, and you can probably already see where this is going. During the 1950s, a certain man was gaining a lot of popularity in Iran, a man named Mohammad Mossadegh, and he became very popular and well-liked because he was able to nationalize the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, which essentially took the control of the oil production out of British hands, keeping the profit for the country of Iran, something that citizens would obviously appreciate. But who didn't appreciate it was the British government, because they had just lost money and power. And because of this, Iran was becoming more and more anti-Western and nationalistic in their sentiments, at least according to Britain. And when Britain tried to retaliate on their own, they failed. And because of that, they turned to the United States asking for help. And their claim to the United States was, hey, Mossadegh is getting a lot of power in Iran, and he's also pretty left-leaning. And this might invite the Soviets into the region and cause a lot more communism than we want to deal with. And basically, the British government could have stopped at left-leaning because the US government was already in. Keep in mind, this is the 1950s, this is post-World War II, approaching Cold War era, but it doesn't even really matter what time it is because America is anti-communist and they were ready to rumble. Once the United States government joined forces with the British government, Project AJAX was fully underway. The ultimate goal of this collaboration was to remove Mossadegh from power and install new management in the country of Iran that were more to the liking of the British and American governments. Part of what the British and American governments ended up doing was creating massive propaganda campaigns within Iran, bribing Iranian officials, infiltrating the press to spread messages that were more aligned with what the British and Americans wanted, and organizing intentionally violent riots in the street of Iran so that they could blame it on Mossadegh's incompetent government. And with all of these tactics and others put together, the goal of making Mossadegh seem unfit worked. And it set the stage for the return of the previous political system they had prior to Mossadegh, which was monarchical control. And once all of the covert operations from the US and British government worked, the Iranian military themselves actually backed the pro-Shah factions that were emerging in Iran and forced Mossadegh out of power. At this point, with the power vacuum in full effect, the US and the UK installed their own preferred monarch, Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi. And this installed ruler ruled as the autocratic monarch for the next 26 years, and coincidentally, during his time in power, had rather substantial support from the West. That was until 1979 when the Islamic Revolution happened. When all of this was going on, there was a lot of people that were suspicious that this coup that the US government was essentially subsidizing and taking part in was happening. But of course, the US government and the British government denied it for many, many years. But decades later, the files surrounding Operation AJAX became declassified, and the CIA formally acknowledged its role in this coup that they had orchestrated in Iran in the 1950s. But by that point, the damage was already done. To me, one of the craziest things about this was that Mossadegh was actually democratically elected, meaning that the people wanted him in there, and he was in power at the will of the citizens of Iran. And as democratic as the US and British governments claim to be, they definitely don't appear to be fans of democracy when it doesn't directly benefit them, which is interesting. And it just makes you think, was there a Red Scare there, or were they just wanting to get their oil money back? I'll leave that up for you to decide. The CIA's Insectocopter. In case Insectocopter is a word you've never heard before, let me explain what it is. It's an insect helicopter, and it's something that the CIA developed during the Cold War as an experiment in spy technology, and was specifically one of the earliest attempts at biomimicry surveillance. Truthfully, this instrument is pretty cool and also pretty terrifying, because keep in mind, this is over 50 years ago when the CIA was able to create a pretty convincing looking dragonfly that had a miniature gas-powered engine equipped with an ultra-lightweight microphone, meaning that it could fly on its own and just, record anything inconspicuously. And compared to alternatives that they were using at the time, this was completely unheard of and also revolutionary. Because now you don't need a huge drone that could be detected or a human in risky areas. You could literally just have a bug flying around. Nobody would be the wiser. However, even though the Insectocopter looks extremely convincing, according to the CIA, they were never able to fully get it operational, and therefore it was never used. And this is because it was too affected by wind, the steering was too hard to control, and because of both of these factors, it was basically useless in any high-pressure situation. And as a result, it was proof of concept and something they would likely put on the shelf. Keep in mind, this bug was created in the 1970s, and the declassification of it even existing didn't happen until 2003, when it was also placed in the CIA's museum for all to see, which is at least pretty cool. But it just makes you think, if over 50 years ago, the CIA was able to create a semi-operational, very lifelike looking dragonfly that was able to fly on its own and record, what do they have now? The declassified documents claimed it was never used, but is there another still classified document that claimed that they were able to make it work? Who knows? Or maybe the dragonfly didn't work, but the beetle worked. I don't know. It just makes you think. FBI memos of Hitler in Argentina. We all know that Hitler and Eva Braun both died in a bunker in Berlin in 1945 at the end of the Second World War. But not everybody believes that. Some people believe that Hitler survived the attack in Berlin and was able to make it to Argentina, where he lived out the rest of his life secretly. Now that is a conspiracy theory, and a pretty crazy one, but there is some interesting declassified files surrounding the situation. One notable file was a memo that was dated September 21st, 1945, which is only just a few months after the Second World War ended. This memo describes the documentation of an anonymous tip that the FBI received claiming that Hitler had arrived in Argentina via a submarine and landed somewhere on the southern coast, and that the Argentinian government had prepared for his arrival and purposely sheltered him and other Nazi families in different areas across Argentina, basically putting them in dictator, genocidal, criminal protection. The memo specifically describes that Hitler was living in a heavily guarded area in the Andes with other high-ranking officers. And there are even reports claiming that Hitler shaved off his mustache, which, I mean, that's the least you could do if you're trying to be covert. Keep in mind, these are not facts. These are anonymous tips that the FBI just got, and they archived them and documented them, but didn't do much about them. And in the years following 1945, the FBI received more tips and letters of people saying similar things. But as a whole, they were just labeled as unsubstantiated and kept on record, but not necessarily acted on, as there was no real basis for the US government to do anything about them. And that's kind of where that FBI memo ends. And what I find really interesting is that the FBI got a lead about Bigfoot hair, and they took action and researched it, but they got a lead about Hitler potentially being alive, and they're like, nah. But I guess realistically, those are two different things, and it's one thing to set a hair for analysis, and it's another thing to try to look for a person in another country once you already know that they're dead. I guess that's kind of the distinction there. But what's interesting is that in 1955, 10 years later, the CIA actually sent agents to Argentina to confirm that Hitler wasn't in Argentina, because there was so many reports that they were getting from looking at the archived posts from the FBI in 1945, and also from more recent reports of people telling the CIA that they are confident that Hitler is alive and in South America. And while these declassified documents are definitely interesting, there is absolutely no proof or evidence that Hitler was ever in South America or didn't die in Berlin. And these declassified documents definitely gave the conspiracy theorists a great heyday when they were first declassified. But what do you think? To me, it's interesting that there is at least recorded documents of people claiming to see him in South America, but as far as proof, that's something we don't have. I'll let you guys fight in the comments, but ladies and gentlemen, I'm gonna leave it there. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video, and if you liked this video, you're gonna love my conspiracy theory playlist. It's on screen right now. So far, this playlist contains all of my videos about crazy conspiracy theories that turned out to be true. And if you liked this video, you're gonna love the entire series. Thank you guys so much for watching. And as always, trust me, bro.